Hello girls, today we are going to discover how to analyse passages or sections of the text we're studying at the moment, Marcus Zuzak's novel titled The Book Thief. Before we begin, we need to understand why we are doing this. What is the purpose of passage analysis? Well, there are two reasons we do this. Firstly, we think closely about the ways in which the text has been constructed or put together. Secondly, we think about what the text reveals in relation to our context, power and justice. We'll call our close thinking about the ways in which the text has been constructed the world of the text. Now, there are three elements to the world of the text for us. The first one is the plot or the storyline. They're slightly different things. The second one is characters, and the third one is the language that the author uses. So the first element is the plot or the storyline. Where does the passage fit into the overall story? And why is this passage in particular important to the plot as a whole? Let's look at a passage in The Book Thief to understand how we do this. The first passage on pages 19 to 25, arrival on Himmel Street. Now let's look at it in relation to the plot. First, it occurs immediately after the prologue, so it's very early on in the story. What happens in this section? Well, Death recalls Liesel's train trip to Munich, remember? And then she gets in the car to go to Molching. Why is this passage important to the plot? It's important because this sets up our understanding of Liesel as a character. The second element in the world of texts is characters. We ask ourselves, which characters are developed? What do they observe or learn? What important things about them are revealed to the reader? So, in the Arrival on Himmel Street passage, we understand that Liesel has been traumatised by tragic events. So far, the upheaval of leaving her family home, and of course in this section, the sad death and burial of Werner in particular. But in this passage, we also learn that Liesel is interesting. She's dreaming about Hitler, which is a bit bizarre, but also she's stealing the Gravedigger's Handbook. Now, the third and final element in the world of the text is the language. We notice interesting words or phrases in the passage, and we need to think about what mood do they create or atmosphere. And for us as readers, what emotions do these words or phrases evoke or spark in us? So, in Arrival on Himmel Street, we notice these pieces of language. Liesel is kneeling and howling. Later on, there are these three very short sentences. No one noticed, line break. The train galloped on, line break, except the girl. And then there was another little phrase, drowning in a train, to describe what Liesel was feeling. Death tells us, I travelled handing souls to the conveyor belt of humanity. And then I picked out another little sentence or sentence fragment from later on in the passage. Mother and daughter vacated the cemetery. Both were skinny and pale, line break. Both had sores on their lips. Let's look more closely at this language and begin to make some observations. So we can actually join three of these quotes together here. Liesel is kneeling and howling, and I joined that with the little phrase drowning in a train. And then finally, mother and daughter vacated the cemetery, both were skinny and pale. All of these quotes are very evocative. They really invite us to sympathise and maybe even empathise with their plight, with their experience. Then this next quote, the train galloped on. Now, this is an example of personification. The train is like a horse galloping. What effect does that have on us as a reader? Well, all of the characters really appear helpless in the face of this unrelenting movement of the train. The last one that I picked up was handing souls to the conveyor belt of humanity, which is a metaphor. And we understand from this metaphor that Liesel's story is one specific example of an ongoing, global, inevitable phenomenon that death is telling us about. The second purpose for studying passages is to make links to our context study, Power and Justice. We know that there are 8 understandings. Understandings are ideas. They help us think on a conceptual level, and they also help make our thinking more complex and interesting. So how do the elements of the text develop the understandings? Well, do they confirm what the understanding says? How do they do that? Do they develop the understanding in an interesting way? How do they do that? And finally, do they contradict or reject the understanding? How might they do that? Let's look at one way to make links. The first understanding in the Power and Justice context is tragic events need not inevitably lead to the crushing of the human spirit. How can we link this? Well, at this early stage in the story, it appears that Liesel is certainly suffering very deeply and is crushed at this point, and obviously her mother is too. Although there's a little glimpse of life, she does steal the book, and we're curious about this. The other thing to notice about this passage is that death tells us that Werner's spirit is healing in his arms. So even this early on, there are just tiny little chinks, little glimpses that do lend themselves to agree with this statement. Let's look at another understanding and see what we can come up with. So number 3 is family relationships have significant influence over our lives. Well, clearly Liesel's world at this point consists of her mother and her brother. That's all she has. We all understand that loss of a close family member is a particularly difficult experience. And Liesel's grief has immediate, right now, and longer term, later on, repercussions. It affects what she does and how she behaves. We understand why she clings to her mother now and later on. Remember when she writes those letters to her mum. There's one more understanding that links nicely to this passage also, and that's number 6. Empathy is vital in order to understand those around us. What do we learn from this passage? Well, the events and the language in this passage really invite readers to take a close interest in Liesel's difficult journey, and we sort of go on this journey with her and death. Now, while these events obviously may not have happened to us, what they really do is they help illuminate or make brighter or clearer the tragic reality of war, particularly war in Germany in the 1940s. So once we've done all this thinking and note-taking, what next? Well, for each passage, decide which understandings are developed the most. Try to really narrow it down to perhaps focusing on one understanding. And then create 1 or 2 sentences that explain how that understanding is developed in the passage, and select quotes and events from your notes to help support your ideas. You are now ready to write an insightful paragraph on the passage. Let's review what we've covered today. The purpose of passage analysis is to, firstly, think closely about the ways in which the text has been constructed. Secondly, think about what the text reveals in relation to our context, power and justice. And now, thirdly, you are ready to synthesize or bring together your ideas into notes for constructing an analytical paragraph on the passage. Thanks, girls. See you next time.